Ready to begin. It's almost 5:30 Central, 6:30 Eastern. Give people just a couple more seconds to log in. Stay true to our advertised time. It is 5:30, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to today's Encore presentation of Fostering a Culture of Respect. This is the second in a 5-part series on religious diversity in the classroom that is in collaboration with Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding and Teaching Tolerance. My name is Sarah Wicht, and I am the Senior Manager for Teaching and Learning here at Teaching Tolerance. Mark will be joining us from Tannenbaum, and he will introduce himself in a minute, but I want to talk about a few things about the platform that we're using. You all are muted, but you should be able to hear our audio. Communication with us will be requested via chat window that's located in the right panel of your screen. We will also be using the poll feature in today's webinar that will request some immediate response from you, and that will help our conversation and our learning. Because we will be using the chat and the poll features today, it's best to stay in the view that keeps the right side chat window visible while watching the slides. But by all means, make sure that you're comfortable and you can see both the slides and what is happening in the chat. So to start, let me tell you a little about Teaching Tolerance. Teaching Tolerance was founded in 1991 by the Southern Poverty Law Center and is dedicated to reducing prejudice, improving intergroup relations, and supporting equitable school experiences for our nation's children. Teaching Tolerance fosters school environments that are inclusive and nurturing classrooms where equality and justice are not just taught but lived. As one of the nation's leading providers of anti-bias education resources, Teaching Tolerance reaches hundreds of thousands of educators and millions of students annually. We are joined today by Mark Fowler, Managing Director of Programs at Tannenbaum. Mark?
Good evening, good afternoon, and I can't see where everyone is from, but if appropriate, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Let me tell you just a few things about Tannenbaum. We are a secular, non-sectarian, not-for-profit based in New York City, and our mission is to combat religious prejudice. And how we do that is by providing practical tools and solutions, trainings like this one in the 4 areas in which we work: in workplaces, studying the work of religiously motivated peace activists in our conflict resolution program, in our healthcare program, working with medical providers in providing appropriate care that's based in the religious practices of patients, and in education. And in education, our 2 primary goals are to provide educators both in school and after school with the tools that they need to create inclusive learning environments where young people become and remain curious about differences, including religious differences, as well as providing the solutions for the inclusion of religion in content-specific activities at the K through 12 level. And I do want to say a special thank you to our supporters, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, for their support of our participation in this webinar series. And then let me just go on to talk a little bit. Well, first, here are the pictures of the talking heads you've been listening to. So here's Sarah and I in all of our glory. And let me tell you a little bit about the essential questions for this series. So we have done a lot of work on this series. We did an initial webinar last fall on the December dilemma, which we did an encore performance of in first given in October, then in December. and then began to theorize this series. And we wanted to be able to delve into and provide information for you around why is it important to include religious diversity in classroom content, and then taking it a step further, if you are going to include religion, then what's the preparation that you need to be able to address religion and religious diversity. So that is our goal in this webinar series, and particularly for this webinar, which is the second of a 5-part series, our essential questions have more to do with, well, in a classroom, what do students need to feel safe, supported, and respected across all of their identities? And if you are able to create this kind of classroom, well, how do you do it? How do you create a classroom that explores and supports and celebrates the various religious as well as non-religious traditions and beliefs? So we hope to, through this session today, be able to point you in the directions of what's going to provide the most value for you to answer these questions. And Sarah, I think I will turn this back over to you so that we can go over our objectives for today's session.
Super. Thank you, Mark. So looking at essential questions for both the series and today, let's get a little more specific and identify what our objectives in the next hour are. We're going to acquire some knowledge to discuss these essential questions. We also hope that through some examples that we provide for you today and a couple of activities, as well as utilizing materials that you will receive in the after session pack, that you'll be able to really look at your own classroom setup and structure and assess the physical space, as well as have some tools for how to co-create classroom norms with students. We have another tool to help you conduct a classroom audit so that you can check what messages are conveyed through the images on the walls and the books on the shelves. So these are our specific objectives for this afternoon. Before we get into the first activity, just a couple of considerations. This second webinar in our series really is talking about how to create a culture of respect where all identities are safe. Our intended audience today is really a beginner-level audience. It was created for educators in all grade levels and all subjects, and addresses concerns that many public school teachers face when addressing religious diversity in schools. We do provide additional information on how to foster a classroom culture of respect through resources listed in the after-session pack, which you will be receiving tomorrow and will be available tomorrow. Specific grade level and academic recommendations, as Mark mentioned, will be provided in the next 3 webinars as we dig deeper into classroom academic alignment with religion and non-religion topics. A little bit of, just lastly, a last note about identity and what identity refers to. Really, identity refers to all of those parts of an individual: gender, race and ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, language, family structure, sexual orientation and ability. But today we will be highlighting religions and non-religious beliefs. Just a couple of ground rules for our time together. We hope that you participate and take notes. Like we said, we'll be using the chat window and the poll feature. We will all try to be mindful of time. There's a lot of information we want to pass to you in this 1 hour together. We hope that you have fun, and definitely hope that you utilize materials after the training, either in way of sharing the recorded version of this evening's webinar with your colleagues and or the materials that you will find in your after-session pack. You will need a piece of paper and something to write with for the first exercise, so hopefully you have that close by wherever you are seated or listening, participating right now. To give you an idea of where we're going, I always like to know what the end looks like before I start. So here is our agenda for this afternoon. We'll do a quick agenda check at each point so that you can see where we've been and what we have left. So let's get started. We are first looking at what makes a safe classroom. You're going to use the chat feature on the right side, and I would like you to share in 1 or 2 words what you think culture refers to. So in 1 or 2 words, what does culture refer to? Entering into the chat window, beliefs, behaviors, norms, traditions, values, and beliefs, values of a society, diversity of the classroom, values and beliefs, lots of values. It looks like there's a little bit of a delay. That's my pause in watching these come in. A way of life. What is culture to our participants today? Thank you so much for entering your thoughts in the chat window. We know that we saw some overlap, and we continue to see some overlap and some common thoughts. Behavior, attitudes, values is another one. Everything in society is culture. Culture refers to a wide range of identity and community characteristics. And positive classroom culture is established and maintained by both teachers and students. That is more safe for all students to be their full selves and encourage deep exploration of complex and challenging issues. So I would like for you now to make a T-chart on a piece of paper. And I'd like for you to think about a classroom that makes you feel safe. On the right side, list 5 characteristics of that safe classroom. On the left side, list 5 characteristics of an unsafe classroom. Give you a few minutes to do that thinking. Not a few minutes, about 30 seconds to do that thinking. Great. So we know that identifying characteristics of a safe classroom from the point of view of the student can be helpful in assessing our own classrooms as a teacher. Keep your T-chart visible, and we're going to use it in the next activity. Look at the right column on your T-chart. These are characteristics of a classroom that make you feel safe. We're going to go through a series of yes or no statements to develop a baseline for beginning to visualize positive classroom culture. We're going to use the poll feature located in the right panel to respond, and we'll give you a moment to enter your response to each statement, and then it takes a moment for that poll result to also show up. So looking at the right side of your T-chart, respond yes or no to the poll question. An item on my list ensures that everyone's voice is valued. A few more seconds. Make sure you click submit, and we'll go ahead and close the poll. Thank you, Joanna. And waiting for those results to come up. As we're waiting for the results of that poll, let's look just a little bit about how voice and participation, valuing voice and participation, helps to create a safe classroom. A couple of ways that this can be done is through personal anecdotes and reflective writing assignments. And we see that about 67% of us are saying yes, that I feel safer in a classroom where everyone's voice is valued. If we can respectfully and thoughtfully share personal anecdotes with our students, there is great power in creating an environment that is comfortable and welcoming to those students. We need to keep in mind that stories should be chosen carefully, that they're kept brief, and told at a level that invites appropriate student sharing. The power of the teacher voice to know that it's a personal story, not a particular opinion necessarily that is being encouraged to be mirrored by students. Also, following readings with discussions or reflective writing assignments is another way to show value of student voice and participation. These also provide teachers with powerful information about their students' hopes, concerns, strengths, and life circumstances. As a classroom language arts teacher for 18 years, my students continuously kept journals, and I learned more about many of my students through the journal than I did through conversations that were oral in class, because some students were more apt to explain more in journals. Let's look at another statement. We'll open a second poll question. Looking at the right side of your T-chart, answer yes or no. An item on my list encourages both students and teachers to speak up against bias, bullying, and exclusion. Enter your response in the poll. And we'll go ahead and close that poll, Joanna. Thank you. And as we're waiting for our results of this poll, let's look a little bit about ways that we can encourage both students and teachers to speak up. A safe classroom encourages that, but I know that we also struggle with being timely in standing up to bias and bullying and exclusion. A couple of ways that we can create this safety element of our classroom is through values-based behavior management and actively addressing all instances of bullying. So we're at 59% yes, 32% no answer. Some people are waiting to see what's going to happen. Some student-generated agreements. Actually establishing a contract with students helps to share ownership. Zero indifference policies versus zero tolerance policies. It means that you never let disrespectful conduct go by as though nothing has happened, but it does not require automatic suspension, expulsion, or other punishments that take kids out of class. Values-based behavior management is also done through restorative justice, which can also go hand in hand with zero indifference. Restorative justice emphasizes building community, repairing harm, and restoring relationships, rather than simply punishing those who have engaged in misconduct. We will talk a little bit later about a teaching tolerance tool that helps to give teachers and students strategies for interrupting bias language and to stand up in a timely manner. Essentially, in your classroom, it's important to make sure that all instances of bullying are addressed so that students are confident that if something should happen, something will be done to correct or to make better a situation. Let's go to a third question, third and final poll question for right now. Look at your list and respond. An item on my list encourages deep exploration of complex and challenging issues. And go ahead, Joanna, and close the poll. Remember to hit submit as you're answering your poll. And while we're waiting for the results of that last question to come up, let's look at ways in which we can encourage deep exploration of complex and challenging issues. Mark, would you like to talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think that in the first example that we have here in terms of identifying hotspots, hotspots can be a number of things. They can be topics that are happening in the press, certainly with what is going on both in the United States as well as around the world. There are a number of religious identities or identifiers that are coming into play. We could look at the Yazidi in Iraq, or recently within New York. In the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple of attacks in different incidences of people attacking Sikh community members, rising anti-Semitism in Europe. And it doesn't really matter whether you are right now in a homogeneous or heterogeneous population, because it's not necessarily about just sharing about the identifiers that are closest to you. It often is about creating a larger context for the exploration, the critical thinking around the role of religion in people's individual lives as well as the way we see it in the world. It could be something like the Christian kid who is ridiculed for saying grace over their food, or the Muslim girl who is constantly being harassed, and boys and others trying to pull off her hijab. So it's not just about specific things or about location, but it is about broadening the topic and identifying in your practice where are the hot spots where religion comes up. And then just around intergroup awareness and understanding, one of the things that we know is that the more work we put in to normalizing, if you will, or one of our behavioral outcomes at Tannenbaum having to do with young people understanding that there is such a thing as religious diversity, and that it's quite broad and quite deep. Whatever work we can do around that helps to establish that safer classroom. We definitely saw in New York as well, several years ago, there was a Sikh student, high school student, who was being ongoingly bullied by someone in the school, and appropriate actions were taken. He was counseled. In one instance, he was suspended. Parents were talked with, et cetera. But this finally ended with a student, that same bullying student, hitting the Sikh student in the face with a key between his fingers. And it was at that point that the Sikh community went to the Department of Education, and there were a couple of protests that ultimately led to the Dignity for All Students Act here in New York State. So we want to preferably avoid this kind of situation, and part of that is doing what we can to normalize this conversation around religion and religious diversity. Sarah, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, actually, just to say a couple of comments about relevant text selection and identifying how important it is for students to feel like they have a place in your classroom. We're going to talk some about what the images in our classrooms, how images in our classrooms relay a message. That also holds true with the text and the materials that we place in front of our students, and the need for them to have both windows and mirrors in the texts that they are exposed to, so that they can have, you know, this rigorous and complex literacy learning, and at the same time see that they have a place in that knowledge that's being brought before them. So the importance of having windows and mirrors with text. To summarize, then, our first section of the agenda, we're really talking about what makes a safe classroom. And fostering that classroom culture of respect means that we value respect, that we're creating safe space for all students to be their full selves, that we're ensuring that everyone's voice and participation are valued, that we encourage both students and teachers to speak up against bias, bullying, and exclusion, that we encourage deep exploration of complex and challenging issues, that we establish and maintain classroom norms together, and that we lead by example. I'd encourage you to return to the left column in your Tchart and consider how items in that left-hand side might be altered to meet the items on the right-hand side. We'll do a quick agenda check. We're to point 3 on our agenda. We're going to look at classroom setup and structure. Classrooms definitely send a message about diversity, as I started to say as we were summarizing classroom safety or safe classrooms. They also send a message about relationship building and communication and what the role of the teacher is and what the role of the students is. And so we're going to look at a couple of examples. In example number 1, the desks are arranged in a U shape. The teacher's desk is in the front of the room. On the wall is a poster of U.S. presidents, a copy of the Declaration of Independence, and inspiring quotes from Winston Churchill, Robert F. Kennedy, and Albert Einstein. Students are working quietly and on an independent assignment. We invite you to use the chat window to enter one example of how this classroom is or is not student-centered. Enter your thought in the chat window. How is this classroom? U-shape is student-centered. Teacher's desk at front. All the inspiring quotes are white men. Only no student work displayed. Male-dominated, teacher-centered. Students aren't talking to each other. The posters seem to be selected by the teacher. No student-teacher interaction. Lots of independent desk work, not a lot of conversation happening in this classroom. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at another example. Same task, next example. How is this classroom student-centered, or how is it not student-centered? Desks are arranged in clusters of 4 with students facing one another. The teacher's desk is in a back corner of the room. On the wall is a display of student self-portraits, a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and inspiring quotes from Maya Angelou, Aung San Suu Kyi, and Cesar Chavez. Students are working with their table mates on a group project. We're seeing clusters and cultural diversity. Clusters. Hopefully the teacher is walking around and talking to students. We're not real sure what the teacher's activity is, but I like that comment. That was important. Where is the student? Where is the teacher? Probably facilitating, we're going to infer. Collaborative, cooperative learning setting. So we're identifying some elements of classroom setup and structure that either helps to create those develop those relationships and really remain student-centered. And I think that we saw an example here of maybe something that is not helpful to creating the student-centered approach or allow for representation of all of those voices in our classroom. In classroom 1, that U-shape, the environment really lacked any multicultural images. The furniture didn't really support collaboration. There was simultaneous participation, we think, but everybody was working independently. And it really didn't cater to multiple communication styles or language needs. In classroom 2, when we look at the environment, there were multicultural images, which many of you commented about in the chat window. The furniture appears to support collaboration. Students were definitely simultaneously contributing, and the display of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights implies that students have at least discussed norms. The messages conveyed by the images on the walls in our classrooms, as well as the books on the shelves and the arrangement of furniture, really with an eye toward diversity or equity and student empowerment, send a strong message about who is welcome within our classroom. Classroom audits should include considering the types of interactions that teachers have with students and that students have with one another. When you really have no control over your furniture, which we know sometimes happens with teachers rotating classrooms or perhaps furniture that's fixed to the floor, You could consider having students share with a shoulder partner or a face partner or a back partner by turning and talking. That turning and talk time really helps to increase the simultaneous participation as well as reduce teacher-centered activities. You can also think about using space that's not occupied by desks and tables. Have students stand and discuss while in a circle in a larger space in your classroom, or perhaps face-to-face with a partner, but standing and away from the desks if you have the dilemma of not being able to rearrange furniture. So we know that thoughtful classroom setup and structure without saying a word sends those messages about what the relationships are like and what the communication norms are and what are the roles of the teacher and students. A welcoming class space sets the tone for participatory engagement. Diverse images affect students' conscious and subconscious understanding of classroom values. Expectations and practices that honor diverse backgrounds also create a more just and equitable educational experience. Establish classroom rules and procedures with students, and then revisit those rules throughout the year. An example of this might be saying that you have a talking piece, and using that talking piece helps to reduce student and teacher talking over one another or interrupting. Students are contributing to a conversation when they're holding the talking piece. Or establishing a step up and step back for older students helps to remind them to refrain from over-participating or monopolizing airtime during class. It's also important to address conflict and hurt feelings authentically and timely. Prepare for those. Have conversations in your planning and preparation time so that you know what are the possible conflicts that might arise out of this classroom academic contact, and what are content, and what are some hurt feelings that I need to be prepared for, and how will I respond to ouch moments, in particular when we're exploring varying religious and non-religious beliefs. Comments or reactions could cause upset or discomfort, and as the classroom leader, you need to check in with students who seem upset as a result of a class activity or conversation. Those ouch moments could be handled in private or could be handled publicly, depending on the student whom is involved. So we've talked a little about safe classroom. We've talked a little about setup and structure. Let's move on to social and emotional learning, and I'm going to pass it over to Mark to lead this portion.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sarah. One of the things I think that we could all agree on is that social emotional learning and respect and safety are as important as literacy and critical thinking skills. And I think we could also agree that students really need to feel both physically and emotionally safe in order to learn. And when we talk about safety, we're talking about everything from physical safety to even safety from stereotype threat or harassment of some kind, whether that be physical or emotional or even moments of exclusion. And by focusing on empathy, that may not be enough. Focusing on empathy and kindness and inclusion alone don't really guarantee social emotional safety within the classroom. There are a lot of factors that contribute to social differences and biases that really underlie those exclusionaries and unsafe behaviors that students and adults, by the way, might engage in. So these are issues that may need to be discussed explicitly so that everyone is clear about it. But we did want to give a moment for some self-reflection around our communication around some of these issues and some of these topics. What are our patterns, if you will, in these practices? So we're going to use the poll feature in a moment, and we're going to bring up some statements and ask you to respond to them in terms of your responses when something happens or occurs in the classroom. Do you always respond in a particular way, sometimes, or maybe never. And we really do invite you to kind of bare your soul, because no one can really see you on this webinar, but to have an authentic experience of your communication style when these issues come up. So, Joanna, can we bring up the first poll? You'll see on your right-hand side, and I'll bring up the slide for you to see the statement. Please respond to, I forego my own opinions and listen deeply to what others say and to the feelings, experiences, and wisdom behind what they say when the topic is religion. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond to this. Do you always do this? Is this something that you sometimes do, or is this something that you never do in your own listening? Okay, Joanna, why don't you go ahead and close that poll. And the responses will be up in a minute. But one of the things I think that's interesting is that when we talk about listening deeply to people's feelings, experiences, and wisdom, and suspending, if you will, or foregoing our own opinions, we very much do believe in our own opinions. And here we see in terms of our responses, 28% of people who answered said that they always forego their own opinions. 40% said that they sometimes do. One brave soul said that they never forego their own opinions. We have a few people who are still chewing on that one. So we're going to bring up another statement for you to consider. And Joanna, why don't we go ahead and bring up that poll. I recognize that our ideas and opinions about religious and non-religious beliefs are only a part of the story, and that other people may have access to pieces of the puzzle that I don't know about. So again, we'll give you an opportunity to respond whether you always recognize this, you sometimes recognize this, or it just really doesn't occur to you, and that's fine too. Okay, Joanna, why don't you go ahead and close that poll? And one of the things that I think is important about this statement is the idea that we know in part, if you will, or that there's part of the story. One of the things that we talk about in our trainings at Tannenbaum is that because there is so much diversity within traditions as well as among traditions, that there's no real way that we could ever fully know everything. And we see this in our response as well. So 49% of people said that they always recognize that their opinions, ideas, and opinions are a part of the story. 21% said sometimes, and now we have two brave souls who actually say that they don't really recognize that their ideas and opinions are a part of the story. And I want to thank everyone for their honesty. Let's go on to our final opportunity for you to respond to these questions and focus on our communication efforts when things like this come up in the classroom. So, Joanna, you can go ahead and bring up that next poll. I build a safe environment to try on new ideas and work through conflicts, controversy, and ouch moments related to religious and non-religious beliefs. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond to this. Again, always, sometimes, or never. And then, Joanna, you can go ahead and close that poll. And then while we're waiting for those results to come up, let me just say that, one, thank you all for participating in this. And this kind of ongoing self-reflection really does help us to identify our own behaviors and emotions that we bring into the classroom about religion, and we may not even be present to. You also want to just give a moment of thought to whether the manner in which you're bringing your thoughts into the classroom around religious and non-religious beliefs is either a bounty or a deficit. Is it actually getting in the way of the experience for you? And in this last statement, we have 25% of people who say that they always build that safe environment, 42% who say that they sometimes do, And now we have even 3% who are saying that they don't. And I'm sure that there are a lot of reasons behind that. To tie up this conversation around social and emotional safety, we've already said that these are important topics. Social emotional learning is important. Students feeling safe is important. But we also have to kind of lean on our own active teaching skills in order to make this really, really hum. We've looked at communication specifically, but active teaching methods, an explicit focus on understanding and appreciating differences, and upstandard training, which Sarah is going to talk about in a minute, and the work that Teaching Tolerance has done around the Speak Up at School program. I just wanted to offer that in our 7 principles for inclusive education, the 3rd and 4th principles, preventing prejudice and promoting social justice, have a great deal to do with giving students the tools to deconstruct stereotypes so that they understand that it's really not, it doesn't make sense for them to talk about all people or those people or to generalize and ascribe behaviors to a group of people as opposed to describing an experience that they had, as well as coming to terms with the idea that what's good for them individually is fine, but what there is to aspire to is what's good for the community, whether that be your classroom or your school. Sarah, did you want to say a word about the Speak Up at School program?
Yes, I would, Mark. Thank you. Speak Up at School is one of our school climate guides that we offer. All of our resources are available at tolerance.org. But what is helpful to Speak Up at School is we really talk about intent versus impact. And when we're including religious diversity in our classrooms and learning about those in our communities that provide some of that diversity, knowing or adopting a positive intention lens helps to encourage a conversation that allows the individual to stand up and change behavior, yet do so in a way that is safe and that will warrant change or create change over time. There's also another resource in the after session pack that will be available tomorrow after this webinar that talks about components of shared inquiry and dialogue. Because really those behaviors are things that we have to practice and name, and we need to help our students do the same thing. So both of those are additional resources that help with the social emotional safety in our classrooms and schools. And we'll continue moving. I mentioned at the beginning of today that we would have the opportunity to look at a tool that you can use to conduct a classroom audit. And so we're going to do that next. A classroom audit is a quick and effective way to determine whether or not you're creating a classroom that fosters respect. And let's look a little bit more closely at how to do that. Here's our first example. We'll use the chat feature to share thoughts. If you share in 1 or 2 words, that's helpful. As the 100 responses start to scroll in, I can follow them a little bit easier. But looking at this photograph, I want you to think who's present, who's missing, how's the furniture arranged, what are students doing, what's the tone of the room. You're typing your observation in the chat window. Space for collaboration. Groups are too separate from each other. Who's present? Who's missing? How is the furniture arranged? I see kids are talking. Where is the teacher? Is she on the outskirts? Why are those women in the background? Students have backs to each other, not much space for work. So one thing to consider about this photograph, we are only seeing a portion of the classroom, but this tool that you could use that is part of the after session pack is one that you could use in a full 360-degree observation of your own classroom. We look at what is visible in the classroom, and then we think about any additional notes. So for example, in the classroom that we looked at, I really didn't see any multiple races or different races represented, so that's not filled in. However, there were some photos on the back cabinet, and there were some people on it. I didn't see any representation of religion. Students were in small groups, fosters collective and conducive to student collaboration, and it seemed largely student-centered. So if this were my classroom, I would take this same form and maybe do a full 360. We don't know what was behind us in our view of this classroom. So let's take a look at another one and thinking of the same questions. Again, 1 or 2 words in the chat window. Who is present? Who is missing? How is furniture arranged? Teachers engaged. It seems warm. The students are focused on the teacher. Some kids don't seem engaged. Bright and happy colors. Kids all watching teacher. Colorful. Age-appropriate community. Circular tables. Cooperative groups. Lots of artwork on the walls. I love in this classroom how much student work seems to be displayed. There are several pictures of people behind the teacher that appear to be representative of multiple identity groups. Many faces on the wall. It's diverse. So you were thinking about who is present and who is missing and how the furniture is arranged. And again, what you would want to do is take this table and walk around observing who's represented. Do I have mostly males? Do I have mostly females? Do I have only males and females? Do I have representation of our LGBTQ community? Are there a variety of races? Is the appropriate age, is the furniture appropriate for the age? You want to check a couple of times a year to ensure that students are provided a myriad of images that are both windows and mirrors so that they can see the many diverse people as well as mirrors that reflect their own identity groups. You can use the chart and walk through halls and common areas of your school as well. And because who is included in the school is also important to consider how welcoming your school environment is. And I think we're left with the case study this afternoon, our almost last item on the agenda, and I'll let Mark walk us through that. Mark?
I am here.
Okay.
I started talking and realized the phone was on mute, but I'm here. So yeah, we did want to give you all a case study before we left as a way to kind of focus some of the things that we talked about during the hour. So in this situation, Mr. Antonio is a 7th grade science teacher in a suburban school setting. His students are predominantly white and middle class. 15% of his students have IEPs. Many of his families are Christian, yet some of his students' families are of non-Christian faith or are non-religious. His course focuses on life science, and students regularly ask questions about evolution and the limits of scientific research and experimentation. He wants to make sure his classroom is inclusive and that students from all backgrounds and families feel welcomed. So we'd like to give you an opportunity, if you would use the chat window, to let us know your thoughts, and particularly around, think about these things. How can Mr. Antonio honor students' experiences, set up and structure his classrooms, establish norms for inquiry and dialogue, and ensure social, emotional safety? Again, as Sarah asked, 1 or 2 words would really be helpful as they're coming in, and I can recreate them for you. And someone is asking what an IEP is. It's an individualized educational plan. So invite students to share their stories, create an environment where children feel free to question, set up buddy system with students, talk about the diversity of scientists through quotes, encourage inquiry and conversation, make sure that students with IEPs are not isolated, celebrate diversity with multicultural and multi-religious scientists, get parents involved. Since the focus is life science, it's a great time for inquiry. Opinions should be accepted and create and establish a contract for interacting with one another. Making sure the students with learning abilities, that all abilities are included in the functioning, that the environment is safe, let students feel comfortable about talking about family and other aspects of culture. So thank you for all of that. And I think you've all hit on many of the notes that we have on this very telling slide. We spoke earlier about hotspots, and certainly this would be an opportunity as Mr. Antonio knows his students, knows the community, what are some of the hotspots that he could begin to predict for. Certainly one of them would be the differing viewpoints, and as someone said, there were a lot of great suggestions around creating contracts, creating an environment, if you will. One of the activities in your after-session pack from Tannenbaum is one that we've included in our first session of the webinar series called Respecting Each Other, that kind of guides how to create a class contract where students actually deconstruct what does respect look like, sound like, and feel like. And while that's a great tool for overall classroom participation, you could certainly use it again when there are particular conversations that you want to have in the classroom that might bring about either disagreements or may provide the kind of background for students not respecting each other or not practicing respect. Predict for students accusing each other of who has the truth, who is right, as opposed to an inquiry around all of the possible ways it could go. There's so many great things coming in. Just so you know, I did want to say that we are going to be using a lot of the information that you're sharing in the chat box as a way to create blog posts, so this information won't get lost. Assertions of who knows the truth, and then name calling, which we want to avoid at all costs. So in terms of our agenda, we're actually moving towards the conclusion of our webinar today. And as I said a moment ago, we really have accomplished most of everything we were setting out to do, talking about how to foster a culture of respect, including creating safe spaces for students of all and multiple identities, including religious and non-religious beliefs, gender, race, ethnicity, ability or disability, appearance, and wealth and poverty. It's really about creating a space where everyone, regardless of their identifiers, feels welcomed and feels safe. And regarding questions and answers, as you may be able to see, there are about 100 people on the call, so we're not going to be able to take individual questions. But what we did want you to know, as I mentioned a moment ago, and some of you who have participated in our other webinars may know, that we will use some of the questions that you pose as blog posts, because often you're asking a question that someone else wants the answer to. That we will be posting over the period between now and our next webinar, which is scheduled for December. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what I'd like to do is just give you a minute or two to actually just put your questions in that you still have. You may have noted them earlier, just want to make sure that we have them. In the chat box, please type in questions that you have remaining around fostering this culture of respect and inclusion in your classroom, and we'll give you a minute to do that. And someone is asking if the presentation will be available to webinar participants. So yes, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available in a few days, and we'll let you know when that's available.
Another question that I think we could answer while we're giving people time to write in the chat box is in reference to the first webinar in this series. What's law got to do with it, which was held back in April, is available via both the Tannenbaum the Tannenbaum website and the Teaching Tolerance website. The recorded version and the after-session materials to that webinar are available for you to download and access and share with your colleagues. Maybe, Mark, as people are finishing their questions, if you want to slide to the next, click to the next slide.
Sure.
Reviewing the our enduring understandings might help to think about what they feel confidently has been communicated today, and maybe will generate or spark another question. When we started, we said that creating these classroom environments that foster foster respect, that reflect diversity and equity and justice are important to the inclusion of all of our identities, and that thoughtful classroom setup and structure that honors student experiences related to diverse cultures and religions help to create safe spaces. Hopefully, the strategies and the activities that we covered today helped to develop our understanding of these two enduring understandings. And in looking at the themes that are kind of emerging from your questions already, I'm really excited to identify some of the follow-up blog topics to make sure that you are continually supported in the questions and the great work that you do in our schools every day. The Tannenbaum blog is on Tannenbaum.org, and the Teaching Tolerance blog is on tolerance.org, and we're going to be on a slide soon that gives some contact information for you to reach us with additional questions should you need following this webinar. So if we could go ahead and Mark and flip to the next slide, please.
Sure.
You will receive an email link with you will receive an email. It's now 6:30 where I am. I can imagine New Yorkers, it's 7:30. I'm so happy to be here, but I think I'm starting to stumble over my words.
You got 3 minutes, Sarah, so you're doing fine.
Okay, great. Participants will receive an email with a link to the after-session materials, and we do encourage you to use them in your practice. We created the webinar tonight with those materials in mind. Search both the Teaching Tolerance site and the Tannenbaum site for additional resources, but we really condensed a lot of the key understandings into the after-session materials for you. So I would start there. We will also tomorrow be providing the webinar recording, and we encourage you to share that with your colleagues. And then directly after you sign off, you'll be directed to an evaluation, and we would be most grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete that. That helps us to establish ongoing programmatic goals and adjust in ways that are more beneficial to our audience. So as well, just let us know how we can support you going forward by staying connected and stay tuned. As Mark mentioned, the beginning of December is when we have scheduled the third webinar in this series of 5, and we're going to start with teaching about religion in the elementary classroom. And this will speak directly and specifically to elementary teachers. We hope that you'll be able to join us for that. We will follow in the first part of 2015 through April-ish and spring with middle and high school level teaching about religion-specific academic webinars. So you'll be watching for that as well. Mark, any closing thoughts?
No, just again, thank you, and thank you, Joanna, for all of your work. It's such a delicious partnership. I enjoy it every time, And thank you all for taking time, whether you're just back to school or a couple of weeks out or a week out. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I hope this has been valuable, and certainly by the questions and your participation, we're excited to be providing this information and this opportunity, so thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to collaborate with you, Mark.
And as Sarah was saying, I've just put up the contact information. Marisa Fastiano, who is the program associate in the education program here at Tannenbaum, who is on vacation this week. If you have questions, you can email her, and Sarah's contact information is there as well. Someone was asking about receiving a certificate of attendance to the webinar, and we can do that. If you would actually should we just ask people to put it in the chat box? How do you want to do that, Sarah?
Yeah, I think via the evaluation would probably be best.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you would like a certificate of attendance, if you could just make note of that in your evaluation in one of the comment sections, then we will get one to you. It probably will not be until next week, though, but we will get one to you.
Super. Thank you, everybody, for attending this afternoon, evening. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.